Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's unofficial, official MAD panel. So I hope you're all in the right place. Are you ready to have a good time? Yes. I'm Emily Agricola Holtrop, and I'm the museum's Director of Learning and Interpretation, and the on-site curator for what? Me worry, the art and humor of MAD Magazine. I'm practicing different ways of saying that. Coming to us from the Norman Rockwell Museum, this exhibition shares over 70 years of wit, satire, humor, and amazing artistry. Tonight, I'm excited to see all of you at this panel discussion. I'm going to be honest for a second. It is a bit of a strange experience for me to sit up here. I'm usually the person in the back checking tickets, helping you find seats in the dark, and perched on the steps of the AV booth. I have to say this seat is much more comfortable. But I do have to say a huge thank you to Maria Jenkins, who is the museum's Assistant Director for Adult and Studio Programs, who did all the planning for tonight. I just get to be the face up here, so please give her a big round of applause. And also to DeMarco, who is in the AV booth and who always makes us sound good and look good. So let's please give him a round of applause as well. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panelists, and then we are going to have a chat with a few questions that I've prepared, and we've allowed plenty of time at the end for you to all ask questions, so get those ready, okay? To my immediate left, I'm excited to introduce Judith Yaross Lee, Distinguished Professor Emerita of Communication Studies at Ohio University and studies in American humor. She has published 6 books and 60+ journal articles and book chapters, won $1.3 million in research grants, led the American Humor Studies Association, the Research Society for American Periodicals, and the Mark Twain Circle. Lectured across 3 continents and taught at universities in Finland, Thailand, and the Netherlands, the latter as Fulbright's Senior Professor of American Culture. In 1991, her book on Garrison Keillor traced his comedy of Minnesota through his history with public radio and as a freelance author. Her book on The New Yorker recovered edgy political cartoons, long-lost women artists, and modernist moves while charting its editorial innovations in target marketing, comic art, and literary humor. Her 2012 book, Twain's Brand, proposed brand name comedy as a Mark Twain legacy in contemporary US culture and showed how recent print and animated cartoons channeled Huckleberry Finn's comically naive viewpoint. And this one has been very important to me over the last few months. Judith's History of MAD leads off the landmark 2020 essay collection that she edited with John Bird and Winthrop University, which treats Alfred, TV and movie satires, song parodies, artists, and more. Next page. Inspired by the Norman Rockwell exhibition, she has just finished an article on MAD's influences beyond comics, including the origins and afterlife of famous cover of number 11. Of her many honors, she is most proud of the American Humor Studies Association gives an early career mentoring award in her name. So welcome, Judith. Don't you love this picture? How many waited to find out who shot JR? Sam Viviano is an award-winning illustrator and art director. Born in Detroit and the graduate of the University of Michigan, he moved to New York in the mid-70s to pursue a career in the arts. For over 20 years, he was a successful illustrator specializing in caricature and cartooning. His work appeared in magazines, books, and advertising. Most notably, he was a regular contributor to MAD magazine. In 1999, Viviano joined MAD staff as the art director, a position he held for the next 19 years. Viviano won the prestigious National Cartoonist Society Award for Best Magazine Illustration in 2009. In 2014, he was inducted into the Media Industry News Design Hall of Fame. One too far. Yeah, little sneak peek. Viviano has lectured extensively throughout the world on his career and history of MAD. He is proud to have been a member of 7 USO tours to draw caricatures of US troops stationed in Europe, the Middle East, and stateside. Most recently, he was lead advisor to the enthusiastically received Mad exhibition at the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And now you get to see this one. Viviano and his wife, a pediatrician, live in New York City along with their boisterous Cairn Terrier named Wallaby. Please give Sam a warm welcome. And finally, we welcome home a Cincinnati native. C.F. Payne's illustrations have appeared in magazines, advertisements, and children's books for more than 35 years. A graduate of Miami University with a BFA in Illustrator and the Illustrator's Workshop, Payne began his freelance career upon his move to Dallas, Texas in 1980. He has taught illustration. You know, I don't want anybody to take it personally that you're laughing at their bios, but I know you're laughing at what's behind me on the screen. He has taught illustration for more than 25 years with 19 years at the Columbus College of Art and Design. Currently, Payne serves as the director of the MFA in Illustration program at the Hartford Art School and the University of Hartford. His art has been exhibited in numerous museums and university galleries, including this one, the Cincinnati Art Museum, the National Portrait Gallery, the Norman Rockwell Museum, Huntington Art Museum, the Baseball Hall of Fame, and more. Payne's art has appeared on the covers of Time Magazine, Mad Magazine, Der Spiegel, the New York Times Magazine, Sports Illustrated, the Reader's Digest. He has illustrated 20 children's books, some by Sue Macy, Marissa Moss, Phil Blender, and noted actor-authors John Lithgow, Steve Martin, astronaut Mark Kelly, and Mark Twain's classic, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. In 2018, Payne was elected to the Society of Illustrators Hall of Fame. Please welcome C.F. Payne. So thankfully, that's all the reading, really, that I have to do tonight. Thank you. I'm just so excited that you're all here, and I've had such wonderful conversations with some of you as we've been walking through the galleries over the last couple days. These two have spent lots of time in the galleries over the last couple days having really wonderful conversations, which has been lovely to overhear. But I have a really interesting question, or a fun question, just to get us started, and I want you all to think about this as well, is what is it about Mad? Why does this 70-year-old magazine have legions of devoted fans from all walks of life and all generations? Each one, Judith, you want to?
I think it has something to do.
You're good.
I think it has something to do, Emily, with the fact that people discover it when they're young, and when they discover it as young people, they're seeing.
Are you talking like this, right into the microphone?
Okay. When they discover it, is this better? Oh, good. When they discover it, what they're discovering is two ways of looking at the world. They're looking at the way that was the official version that is now being parodied, and that the underside of this parody. And that, when that hits them, is like, people tell me that when they discovered Mad, suddenly their world opened up, that the official version of reality was not all there was. The official version of how they should behave or how they should think was not all there is. That's a profound moment in adolescence or in late childhood when that happens, and people carry it through as they age. But as they age, they can go back to the magazine and see more than they were capable of understanding at 10, 11, or 12, because the people who created it were not 10, 11, or 12, and they had brought an adult perspective to it. So it's this combination of having the adult world revealed and then being able to see it again later. So I think people picked it up at various times over the 60 years of its greatest hits. But they carried it with them as they matured. The things they didn't quite understand at 10, 11, and 12 stick with them as puzzles that then they can understand later.
Sam, you want to field that one?
Like she said. No, I think that's absolutely Mad at its best is a rite of passage. And it allows you, it allowed generations of kids to kind of figure out what adults were all about. And very deliberately was a magazine that was not really glossy. The covers were glossy, but it's printed on newsprint, essentially, and it was a kind of little secret that we all had. And very cleverly, it allowed you to get into it in whatever way you wanted. There were strips like Spy versus Spy, no words. You didn't have to be able to read it. But there were also things that were very copy heavy, that were very dense. And so you could kind of grow up in a way by learning how to read with Mad. And that certainly was my experience.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll try. Is this good? Okay. All right. Like Sam said, just what she said, but I'll go beyond that in the sense that for a lot of us, Mad Magazine was kind of our transition from comics, because that was where I first got involved with looking at artwork, was in the comics. And I think it must have been around 5th grade, as you start getting out of that comic area, you discover Mad Magazine. And it's the thing that was also great about it was, I mean, every single thing was art. Everything was art. And see, I was a kid that drew all the time. So that's what attracted me. It was a book filled with art. And it was humor, and it took no sides, and it took no prisoners. It had a great deal, but it was never mean. It was never mean. But it had great fun. And as I said, it helped you transition through, at times for a lot of people, those years between 5th grade and 9th grade, those can be difficult years for kids as they grow up. And Mad was this incredible outlet that kind of diffused at times, I remember, the tensions that one has at that age as you're trying to advance into adulthood.
I think it was mean in some cases. I mean, we have a person in our book collection who writes about the Shield and Irving Shield and a variety of writers who took aim at Nixon in very, very bitter ways. And he was that was kind of an exception to the both-sidism that I think was more typical of Mad.
Although the argument could be that while they definitely really hit hard at Nixon, it's not as if you could say, well, Mad only hit at Republicans.
That's true.
Because
That's true.
they hit at Kennedy, they hit at Clinton, they
Obama.
hit at Obama, yeah. There you go.
They went pretty hard on LBJ, too. They hit him pretty good.
Yeah.
Equal opportunity offenders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've alluded to this a little bit, but I would love to hear what first interested each of you as whenever you became interested in Mad, and what is your first Mad memory, and what influence did the magazine have on each of you growing up?
Well, I'm not an artist, and although the comics were definitely interesting to me, I think I really loved the songs and the poetry parodies in particular. But I think the thing that really stood out to me as a young girl of 10, 11 years old was the Jewish undertone to the humor. And I was the kind of kid who grew up with Yiddish-speaking parents, and I didn't understand, that was the language of secrets, but there was just enough Yiddish in there to help me see that this was the kind of joking that was familiar to me that I didn't see anywhere else in the media in the late 50s and early 60s. And so that was an entree to a kind of ethnic humor that I understood as folk life, but that I had not seen in print before. And that was really the avant-garde for the kind of Jewish American literary humor that grew with Philip Roth and other writers later on, but that was not quite there yet.
Well, my first memory of Mad was when I was about 6 years old, and I saw a copy of Mad in the basement of Linda Winnuck's house. Linda Winnuck lived down the block from me in Detroit, and actually it was a babysitter for me, so that's probably why I was there. And I was too young to read it. I mean, I could read a little bit. I was 6 years old. I was a very smart 6-year-old too. And
Well, you are from Michigan, so
Yeah.
we're very smart.
But the pictures are what got me, and I remember very much. We were talking about Kelly Freas. It was a Kelly Freas cover, and all of it inside, and just as you said, Chris, the pictures. It was just full of pictures, and that was my start. And you know, as I got older, I got more interested in it. And I was a comic book nerd for many, many years, and thought that's what I wanted to do. And somehow, Mad seeped back into my life.
Well, yeah, the similar thing. I mean, I wasn't 6 years old. Mine was probably, I'd say, somewhere in 5th or 6th grade. As I say, I was into comics. And so were you a DC guy or a Marvel guy? DC. Okay, see, I was Marvel. except for I dug Sergeant Rock, you know, and Gil Kane, you know, those artists. So to me, it was always the art. You know, if the art was good, man, I was there. I was checking it all out. I was reading, and I was just copying the art. I mean, Steve Ditko was it. And so I think it was where, like I said, we used to have in Wyoming this thing called Bay Fate. And they would have books. You know, they would ask families to turn in their paperbacks, their comics, all the old magazines, and they put them out, and you could buy them, and all the paperbacks would be in one section for the adults to go through, and they have boxes of comics. And I was going through the comics, finding, you know, like a Fantastic Four or something like that was cool. But then all of a sudden I found this Mad magazine, and I swear it was the Scarecrow by Kelly Freas that's upstairs in the collection. It still is absolutely one of my all-time favorite covers. And just was fried when I saw that, and I was able to get a few others. And that was from about 1957, something along that lines. And so it was before, so this would have been probably 1965. I'm finding a 1957 Mad magazine, and I start pouring through it, and then I start discovering people like Jack Davis, Mark Drucker, and just the incredible artists that Mad magazine hired to do the artwork for them. The art was just so good, the humor was so funny. I mean, it touched, you know, all the tones that you wanted to when you were that age. And I was just captured by that point.
Wonderful. And I'm going to be really honest. I did not read Mad as a kid. I picked up probably maybe an issue when I was a kid, but it was sold to me as a boy magazine. Does anybody else have that a little bit? I was a 17 magazine girl, and so learning about Mad with this exhibition has been absolutely wonderful.
Well, there's no question that for most of its history, Mad could be seen as having a smart 13-year-old boy in the Midwest as its primary audience.
How many of those do we have in the audience tonight?
Well, I know I used to lead a delegation of the kids in our neighborhood to a newsstand when the new issue came out so that we could buy it. And the group of us would go. I was the oldest, and so I got to take everybody across the streets where you had to wait for the light. And so that was my role in it. But I think that girls might have been interested in other parts of it. And I know that we used to think that the poetry parodies of Poe and all of the classic poets we were getting rammed down our throats at school, we just thought these were such hilarious parodies. And later, the song parodies really were things that we enjoyed singing together. So there were girls who did enjoy, but I think it was a different part of the magazine.
Did you get the Mad magazine 45 record?
I did not have that. No.
Oh, that was a beauty. Oh yeah.
But I have since listened to it. It's at
belching.
archive.org.
Well, I feel like I missed out in my childhood not having Mad, but you know, I talked to my mom the other day. I'm like, why didn't I get to read Mad magazine? She goes, honey, I don't know. She goes, that was a long time ago. Before we go on to the next question, last night when we had our event, I asked everybody to raise their hand if you've read a Mad magazine at least once in your life. So I'd love to see a show of hands of people who have read a Mad magazine at least once in their life. Good, we're amongst good people. Here's my follow-up question. How many of you had to hide it from your parents? Less, good, I love that. So I'm glad that we're amongst friends and people and fellow Mad lovers. We talk in the exhibition about Mad's influence on late night television like SNL and The Daily Show, but can you each share one or more ways that Mad's influence is prevalent that might not be readily obvious? Like, where do we see Mad today and its influence in just everyday life that might not be obvious to folks?
Weird Al Yankovic. Weird Al will give his honest tip of the hat to Frank Jacobs, who wrote those song parodies that Judith read when she was young, and actually became a very good friend of Mad's. In fact, actually guest edited. The only time we ever had a guest editor was Weird Al.
I would say Randy Rainbow. Randy Rainbow grew up with his mother singing mad parodies around the house. And one of the most important Supreme Court decisions ever made about humor have to do with the song parodies, because Irving Berlin sued EC Comics, Mad's parent, and it resulted in a Supreme Court decision in 1962 upholding the Second Circuit evaluation that basically said parody is fair use of copyrighted material. And as a consequence, today, parodies of popular songs actually outnumber legal, author covers and original performances on YouTube. But without EC and this Supreme Court decision, Randy B. Rainbow could not do his thing. So I think there's a pretty interesting example.
Well, I'll approach it again from the art side of it. Again, I mean, I had the pleasure of one day calling Mort Drucker on the phone. And, I'm like 45 at this time, and I'm talking, he answers the phone, and I'm just like shaking like I'm talking to Babe Ruth. And I had to tell him, and I said this also to Jack Davis, you two artists probably influenced more people to become an artist than, I'm sorry, all the museums. Simply because you got us at that age. That's where you got the rock first turn for us to want to be illustrators or artists. And you go through and you see the stylization when you see the artwork upstairs. There are so many contemporary illustrators today working who owe their chops to guys like Mort Drucker, Jack Davis, Paul Coker, all these great artists that were part of that magazine. Wally Wood, gosh, I think of Wally Wood. It's just incredible. And you talk to folks, and I think they have, led to the next generation who are now, many of them teaching at schools, and they're teaching the next generation who will be the next humorous illustrators.
Can we also say The Simpsons? Because not only was Matt Groening himself a fan, but can you go back to that last slide of my introduction? Yeah, there. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, there's Lisa in the Big Book of Smiles in an episode of The Simpsons where they're trying to explain to Marge that if Lisa doesn't get braces, she's basically going to look like this. And you can see the derivation of Al Cap's Lena the Hyena, which was drawn by Basil Wolverton, who did the Mad parody issue of Life, number 11. And the caption for that is, "Beautiful Girl of the Month Reads Mad." It's a parody of Life magazine covers of the sultry sort that I put on the left there. And so you can really see that this one cover has had, a lot of resonance. It had resonance in its day for parodying Life, but then it was clearly a salient image for The Simpsons, and that particular episode of The Simpsons, just to complicate this question a little more, because that's my job, is that it was written by Jay Kogan, who is the son of Arnie Kogan, who was a mad writer.
You're getting so much great information tonight.
And to add to that, there was an episode of The Simpsons in which the family visited New York and Bart saw a sign that said Mad Magazine and went up and visited the Mad offices. And I will tell you, if you've ever seen that episode, they really are nothing like that.
Sure. You know, I've been asked this question a lot in the last few weeks as we've been talking about this exhibition, but I would love to hear from each of you as to why is it important for an exhibition like this to be at an art museum? And I'm going to actually start with Chris on the end as the artist. Well, we have a couple artists.
I'll say one of the main reasons is because it features illustration. I mean, you go to most museums throughout the country, you will not see illustration. I believe the Cincinnati Art Museum has in its collection down in the basement a Norman Rockwell drawing. I don't think it's ever been on display. But meanwhile, with the Mad Magazine show, you are now getting to see 2 original Norman Rockwell illustrations. And, you know, I've taught illustration now for the better part of 30 years. Worked with Bunny Carter, who's here, who's taught illustration with me at Hartford. And she probably has forgotten more about illustration than most people know. And it's just so unique, this art form that we have here in the United States called illustration, that just doesn't get to be seen. And yet, so many of the iconic images that we know of that are so uniquely American are done by illustrators. Alfred E. Newman, Uncle Sam, all these other figures in these ads, you know, the Coca-Cola Santa Claus by Haddon Sundblom, things like that. And these artists are incredibly gifted, talented artists. They're just called illustrators. And thank you for having this show to introduce to this community illustration. And I hope you guys will go around, because there are wonderful books about illustration and many of the artists who produce those works. And so I ask you, if you love this stuff, look it up. You'll enjoy it.
Like he said. No, but you know, I think Chris and I kind of share this realization that this is something that's almost long overdue, the kind of validation that a real art form is recognized, and recognized at the level of an art museum as opposed to being seen as what it has been for so long, is simply ephemeral, because it appeared in magazines, newspapers, advertising that supposedly you looked at and kind of threw away. But particularly in the case of something like MAD, we begin to realize that when we were kids, you didn't throw it away. You'd read this MAD and you'd put it on the shelf. That's how you could come back to it a year later and say, oh, now I get the jokes because I'm a year older. And so I am extremely gratified that it is, you know, little by little being recognized. And I think Chris made a really strong point earlier, is that if you're talking about art as something that moves people and inspires people and makes people say, I want to do that, there are probably more people who have been inspired by illustration than by fine art in a museum. And you know, I like that.
I'd like to put a kind of an academic twist on this point of view by saying the dividing line between the fine arts and the popular arts is a really artificial line. And I think that it's important to recognize that that's an artificial line. I think it's true in music, and I think it's true in visual arts. I think it's true in literature, that is in writing. And I think that museums have a role to play as educational institutions in erasing that line, or at least blurring it, and bringing people to see a spectrum rather than a sharp divide. in all of the arts.
Yeah, people have asked me, why is the Art Museum doing this? I'm like, why shouldn't the Art Museum do this, right?
Great answer.
Sam, you've talked a couple times over the last couple days about how the sausage is made. So could you walk us through the process from initial idea to issue and how many hands and brains go into making of a story? And I will show, you tell me when you want me to flip to the different pictures.
Okay, well, okay, let's start. This is a parody of the movie The Royal Tannenbaums, and this was written, I believe, by Arnie Kogan, who Judith just mentioned. Arnie started writing for Mad, I believe, in 1958, and was still writing as of when I retired from Mad in 2017. So do the math. That's almost what is that? 60 years. And he's not alone. At one point, we had a dozen contributors, writers, artists, cartoonists who had worked for Mad for over 50 years. I just want to throw that in. Usually with something like this. Now, garden variety Mad articles generally start with the writers. They will send in proposals. You know, this is what an article I thought of. When it comes to movies and television show parodies, it starts with the editors. They say, okay, this is a movie we want to do in the magazine. This is a TV show. And then they'll decide, okay, this would be good for Arnie Kogan. This would be good for Stan Hart. This would be good for Dick DeBartolo. And they say, okay, go see the movie. Sometimes they would go off together and watch the movie themselves back in the days when the movies would originate in New York and you wouldn't be seeing them here until 6 months later. The writer will go and write the article, and the generally written movie parodies like a movie script. It will tell you what's the action in the panel, and then so-and-so says this, so-and-so says this, so-and-so says this. Send it to the editors. Now, I've always said that a lot of readers got the impression that, you know, Stan Hart would write the article, send it to Mort Drucker, say, you draw it, and send it into Mad, and they'll print it. Like, the staff is just a clearinghouse, you know, paper pushers. But no, the staff has a lot of, a big part to play in which they get the script, they start deciding how much of it is working, how much of it is not. Then they'll send it back to the writer, and they'll indicate, okay, this is a good part of the movie to parody, but your jokes are a little weak. Can you punch them up a bit? This panel we want you to replace with a different scene from the movie. And it might go back 2 or 3 times. And then sometimes even after that, the editors themselves will punch up the script a bit. At that point, once you have the final script, it goes to the art department. And in the old days, yeah, now these are just illustrating things. There you go, that's what I wanted to do. This is just a little template. And it's just to kind of show you something about how it's set up. One thing you may never have noticed when you read a Mad parody is that the left-hand page is situated up and the right-hand page is situated down. And that there's a channel in the gutter, in the middle of the magazine, that separates them. So you kind of see that little white Z shape, S shape. That way you don't read all the way across the page. Now, it might seem simple, it might seem obvious, but it actually took several years to develop this particular format to make it clear how you are supposed to read a Mad movie parody. Now, the other thing I want to point out here, and I just threw it together relatively quickly, is you notice how the boxes, the balloons, even though they're not really balloons, they're boxes, with the copy line up. They're straight across at the bottom. Even in a situation like the one in the bottom right, where you have one person talking, then another person talking, then the first person talking again. Everything lines up. This is something that I realized fairly recently was very important from the very beginning of Mad, which is precision. And you don't think about that. You don't think about, in a humor magazine, that there's precision. But it started with Harvey Kurtzman when he would lay out mad comic book stories for Jack Davis and Wally Wood and Willie Elder, and he would do layouts, and he would have layers and layers and layers of tracing paper in which he would tighten up the layout until it was just right, and then that's what he would send to the artist. And when Al Feldstein took over, he wanted to make sure that all the type lined up perfectly so that you wouldn't have this kind of loosey-goosey way of reading it. And he would copycast every single, Al Feldstein liked to say that every word in Mad went through his typewriter. And that's because he wanted to make sure that it was precise. And even when I became art director, that was my mandate, was to make sure that everything worked, and it was true in the art, and it was true in the writing, and it was true in the editing. So by the time we would get that script, it had been honed. And whether it was Lenny Brenner, who did it in the old days and set things up on old mechanical boards with type that had been set by a typewriter that he would cut out and then glue to the mechanical board, or in my day, setting it up in Adobe InDesign, you want to make sure that by the time you send it to the artist, they have no question where they're supposed to draw their pictures. And they would get something kind of like this, with the words set up, and they would get the script so they knew which scene they were supposed to draw. And then the artists get to work. Now, if it's a movie parody, they're drawing likenesses. And this is just want to throw my hat out to Mort Drucker, because Mort set the standard for this kind of work. And the amazing thing is, it's one thing to draw a caricature. Chris has done many, I've done many, and it's one thing if you're doing a cover illustration and you have one drawing, one painting, one illustration, one caricature to do of an individual. Mort Drucker was doing 6 caricatures of a person on every page.
If not more.
If not more. Plus, it wasn't just one person.
Oh.
It'd be dozens of people, and in different positions, in different angles, different expressions. And that is not very easy to do. Beyond that, he had to get the gags that were in the script on the page. He had to be able to sell the gags. And he's trying to tell the story of the movie. I always likened it to juggling 20 balls at once. Not very easy to do. But Mort did it with precision. Jack Davis did it with a different kind of precision. And those who have followed, including myself and Tom Richmond, have all had that same goal, to be able to tell the story, sell the gags, get the likenesses, and make it look good, too. So the first thing the artist does is start working on the likenesses, doing sketches for himself, and then starts doing sketches, telling the story, and sends the sketches to the art director. I've been on both sides of that. I've been an illustrator, I've been an art director at MAD, and the first thing is, are they telling the story? And if that's the most important part, some artists, Mort Drucker would send us in, he would do the artwork right on the final boards, and his sketches were very, very loose. They were very loose pencil sketches, but you knew how he was telling the story, he knew if he understood the gags, and because he was Mort Drucker, you knew he was going to get the likenesses. When I was doing it myself, I would do basically thumbnails, because it was the same idea. I want you to know how I'm going to tell the story, and if you're going to argue with me about whether I've got the likenesses in my thumbnails, well, then get somebody else, because I've worked with you long enough, you know I'm going to work on the likenesses on the finished art. So what's really important is, are they telling the story? Because we have confidence. One of the reasons that MAD artists last so long, that people like Mort worked for MAD for over 50 years, is because after a certain point, The editors and art directors knew what Mort could give them, and Mort knew what they wanted.
Sam, can we look at your art for The Wizard of Oz?
Okay, sure. There we go.
So this is one of Sam's parodies from before he became art director. And one of the things that's really, really interesting about this is the way in which this parody of The Wizard of Oz, which was done for the 300th issue, which they commemorated by doing 3 movie parodies in the same issue. This one is overlaid with a tremendous amount of both political and cultural satire. If you look at the go back one. So look at the people who are standing alongside the yellow brick road there. The good witch is Vanna White, and, but she's only introduced as Vanna. And standing next to the car are characters from Pretty Woman. So this is going to be about the rise of Wall Street, and it's going to be about the greed is good era. And so Pretty Woman, Richard Gere and Julia Roberts are right next to the car. If you turn the, and Sam Viviano is there too. Oh, they're in the next page, sorry.
Yeah,
keep going. They're on the next page.
You've got Jane Fonda and Ted Turner.
Yeah, you got Jane Fonda and Ted Turner.
30-something.
And we have Sam Viviano.
Fox.
And we have Sam Viviano.
And me and my wife at the very end.
Turn the page. Turn the page. Yeah, up in the big panel in this and the big
In the center.
In the center, there you have Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, and up and above it, wearing a button that says "Greed is good," is the character from Wall Street.
Michael Douglas.
Yep, that's Michael Douglas. On the next page, flip, we have on the left-hand side the beginnings of cultural criticism about the opening of various casinos by Donald Trump. And this is one of many mad parodies that involve Trump. Up in that airplane that is distracting you and moving your eye off to the left is a Trump airline from that period where he was investing so much in that later he would become subject to investigation by the New Jersey Gaming Society because of the imminent bankruptcy of the Taj Mahal, which is shown on the right. And you can see down in the bottom of the right-hand page, in the left panel at the bottom, he's sitting in a throne. He is the Wizard of Oz. And he is in a throne that says the Donald. And he makes several comments about transforming people by turning them into paupers, and he's got a song there that on other occasions, when I could actually read it, I would sing for you, but I'm not going to do that. Turn the page. At the bottom end, you have in the bottom, you have Ivanka and Marla Maples, his first and second wives, and he's telling Dorothy, who says, I really want to go back to Oz. This is not the world I want to live in. He says, oh, I'll set you up in an apartment, and you can be my new bimbo. So you can see that there's this elaborate, both personal satire of a figure in New York who was very well known and in the news a lot in this time. This is from January of 1991. But also a lot of cultural criticism with other movies brought in to kind of deepen the critique of the greed is good era. And so here's something that starts out as a movie parody, and Sam's art is really, really wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
It begins as a movie parody, but it ends up as way more than that.
A couple things, if I might add.
Please.
This is from Mad 300, and the editors decided as a special feature of the issue that in addition to one regular movie parody, which Angelo Torres illustrated, they would do 3 parodies of old movies that they had never done, mainly because they came out before the magazine existed.
Gone
They
with
had
the Wind.
Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, and Wizard of Oz. Oddly enough, all of them, 2 from 1939, 1 from 1941, so almost like within the year and a half period. Jack Davis illustrated the Gone with the Wind parody, Mort Drucker illustrated Casablanca, and I got the plum of doing Wizard of Oz. So that, it was an exciting thing for me to do, because it kind of put me on the same level as Mort and Jack, which is kind of like saying that a kid playing scrub baseball is put on the same level as Aaron Judge, you know. But I took it. And the thing I noticed as Judith was talking is all of the background gags that are in there. You can even see it on this page that Ivanka and Marla have little arrows pointing to them about their hair and their bodies and things. And other pages have lots of all the people in the background. The term that's used in Mad World for that is chicken fat. The added background gags, and they're generally it's attributed as originating with Willie Elder back in the Mad comic book days in the early 50s. Willie knew how to throw in those kind of gags, and he didn't start it. They were in Smokey Stover, if you remember, by Holtzman, a newspaper strip. I thought you would have known that.
No, I'm sorry. Stumped me.
But it did become a Mad tradition. And, you know, I was very happy to get in that. Most of the background gags originate with the artist as opposed to the writers. Now, some writers might suggest it. Desmond Devlin, who writes lots of Mad parodies over the last 25 years, gives very dense instructions in his scripts. Some writers give no instructions at all, other than this is the scene where, you know, so-and-so does something. So when you see those gags, a lot of them are Mort Drucker's gags, or they're Angelo Torres's gags, or my gags, or Tom Richmond's for that matter, nowadays. And I was shocked to see how much I threw in there, because, yeah, it's pretty rich, and every single one demanded the reference of finding out Jane Fonda, Ted Turner, Richard Gere, Julia Roberts. Well, I was young then, you know. Anyhow, so just to get back to once the sketch is done, then the artist does the finish. But because it's gone through all of this, this whole routine at this point, and because generally there's already a relationship, we know what the artist is going to give. There's very few changes that occur once the finished art is done, because we've kind of done our due diligence all the way up to that point. So once the art is done, now in the old days, the type was set by a typesetter, and Lenny Brenner, the production guy and later art director, would blow it up, twice up, he'd stat it up, and send it to the artist, and we'd have to cut the type out and paste it into the balloons ourselves, so that then it could just be sent right to the printer, and the printer would photograph it right from the art. It was very simple. Once into the digital age, it was much simpler, because the type would already be set within an InDesign document, and we would just place the art into that. So it's a long process. But once again, I want to emphasize, and this is something I've been thinking about more and more over the last year or two, is the idea of precision. That it's not as loosey-goosey as everybody thinks it is. That we really take humor very seriously.
Well, I was going to say, I think it was Steve Martin who said comedy is serious business.
Yeah. It really, and I like to tell the story in the Mad offices about the editors. You know, I would go into the editor's office, and there would practically be fist fights. They'd be arguing over a comma in a script, because the joke wouldn't land depending on the comma or not. And that really was what Mad was all about.
I don't even want to know how they feel about the Oxford comma.
Yeah, this isn't, can we talk about that one? This is an example of how some of the political satire developed in the Kurtzman era, and how that became the kernel of the mad idea. So on the right, you have the famous ventriloquist and dummy are Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. On the left, you have a satire that Harvey Kurtzman wrote, the art is by Jack Davis, about political theater in the early days of television, and this is about the Army McCarthy hearings, which were happening more or less at the same time as the comic book hearings. And you can see that Roy Cohn is whispering into McCardaway's ears, and this happens in 3 panels. I only have 2 of them showing here, but it happens in 3 panels because Harvey didn't want anybody to miss it, that he is making the 2 McCarthys being shown with their puppet masters, with their ventriloquists, and that he's attributing the terrible things that Senator Joseph McCarthy did to his ventriloquist, Roy Cohn, who was the legal advisor to McCarthy's committee. And so I thought it'd be interesting for you to see the model of the ventriloquist pair, that you could see that this is a very deliberate use, flipped probably because there was some tracing involved. Or it's possible the photograph was flipped. But anyway, this was a standard photograph that was in wide circulation in the 40s.
Okay, Chris, this is the last question that I have, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Tell me about, this work is in the collection, is in the show, and it is by Chris. What was that first phone call to be in MAD? What was that experience like, and how did that happen?
It was shocking. I mean, because again, it was just such a part of my life. And so when I got the call, I believe it was from John Ficarra, and this was not my first MAD cover. My first MAD cover was the Whoopi Goldberg. But prior to that, I got a call to do a piece, and they wanted it to be Alfred E. Newman plunging a toilet and pulling out Howard Stern. And so, I was so excited. I thought that was funny. I thought it was funny, let's do it. So I worked on this thing. I got my son to dress up. I got him in some bib overalls and got a plunger and had him model for the body and everything. And I sent the drawing in. And they said, no, we need to have the hands going up over his head. We want the hands, because I had the hands kind of going like this. He's pulling them up. And they wanted them up. And at that time, I was talking with Nick Meglin at that point. And I said to Nick, but if we put the arms going up, your arms can't go up and show Alfred E. Newman's characteristic ears. They're going to block those ears. And he said, well, they want it. And I said, I can't do it. You'll have to find another illustrator. And so you hang up the phone going, oh my God, what have I done? I just had told, I don't usually tell people no. I mean, I'm a pretty agreeable person. But I just felt like if I was going to be on the cover of Mad Magazine, I could not have, for the lack of a better word, I can't afford to have a turd on the cover of Mad Magazine, and my name is associated with it. And so I said, no, I couldn't do it. They ended up having Jack Davis do it, and Jack did it, but he only blocked out. He had one arm going behind the head and one arm going in front of the head, which was an okay solution. Of course, Jack is brilliant, and it was great, but it was interesting. Then I got a call from Nick some months later, and he said, you were right. And he said, I appreciate the fact that you had the guts to say no to us. So anyway, then I got to do the Whoopi Goldberg one. And so, I mean, it was just so exciting to do. And like I said, you want, first of all, like I said, you look at Kelly Freas and Norman Mingo. The story of Norman Mingo someday is an incredible story. But the quality of the art, I mean, I still remember that. Alfred E. Newman jumping out of the plane with a parachute. Instead of a parachute, it's a backpack, like a Cub Scout backpack. But the the art in that, the background, the sense of depth in that picture was just so incredible. So I was just so focused on wanting to make sure what I did was absolutely the best art I could do. Yeah, I'm so thrilled because my wife is in the picture, my son's in the picture, my buddy Craig's in the picture, I'm in the picture, my buddy Wally's in the picture. I'm literally kind of parroting a Norman Rockwell where he used all the neighbors and what have you in this particular picture. And it's one of my favorites, and I'm really thrilled that I got to do this, because they had another cover that said "We're number one," which had
The number one F magazine.
yeah. And so that was, so I got to sort of parrot off of that too.
They
So
had to
it's
apologize for that. They had in one of the archives. In one of the archives in Nick Meglin's papers at Duke, they have a copy of the form letter they sent out when parents and other people complained about that cover, apologizing for their bad taste.
Well, the distributors actually refused to distribute it, and there were actually, even when I was working in MAD, we're talking about in the 21st century, boxes of that issue from from the 70s.
I think 70s or early 80s.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's from the 70 something, I think 74, 76.
And there was a point where they actually started giving away that issue because they had so many as a subscription premium. Seriously. So things had changed by the time you did this cover.
Yeah, and but I mean, it was one of those things where your whole life gets to kind of come around in full circle to where you get to do this thing. And I think we did maybe about 8 or 10 covers, and then you guys discovered Mark Fredericks, and the world changed.
Well,
And Mark is brilliant.
Yeah,
Mark is absolutely brilliant.
it's kind of change in general philosophy. There was a period where we were using a number of different cover artists,
Right.
like a rotation. Yourself, Mark,
Jim Bennett.
Roberto Parada,
Jim Bennett.
Richard Williams. Who did you mention?
Jim Bennett.
Jim Bennett, yeah. And I think what happened is that Mark kept hitting the sweet spot for everybody, both
Yeah.
content, style, and Carl liked his work, I liked his work. He was working, by the time he started becoming regular, he was working digitally.
Right.
In Photoshop,
Right.
which meant there was a certain, not that he worked really more quickly, but he could make changes quickly, in a way. So Mark became the kind of regular.
When you see his work up there, look for Mark Fredericks, you see he gets a hyper detail that just my eyes can't handle. I can't get that detail. His stuff is just off the charts.
Yeah.
I have 2 of his originals.
Do you really? But that's when he was working airbrush.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we could probably sit and listen to them all night, right? They've got such wonderful stories.
You talk amongst yourself.
Yeah.
We're going to talk over here.
So we have time for maybe a couple questions. So if you want to raise your hand, please wait until Maria gets to you so you can speak in the microphone, because we are recording this evening.
You must have at some point heard from somebody who you parodied. And I wonder if you got negative comments, positive comments, lawsuits, or...
Well, Chris mentioned the Howard Stern cover that Jack Davis ended up doing. Jack was kind of a go-to guy, because Jack Davis also finished the cover that Norman Mingo had started just before he died.
Oh my.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But Howard Stern was interviewing Jerry Seinfeld, and they both agreed that the high points of their career was when they were on the cover of Mad. And to be honest, that really was mostly the kind of feedback that we got over the years. It was positive. People wanted to be in Mad, and a lot of times even wanted to come visit the Mad offices. Robert De Niro brought his son to the Mad offices. That was before I was on staff, so I didn't get to meet him. I did get to meet Lin-Manuel Miranda. Lin had a kind of Facebook friendship with Dick DiBartolo, the writer. And he told Dick that he wanted to visit the offices. And it didn't happen, Then Dick wrote to him and said, you know, if you're going to come, you better come quickly because we're closing the offices in December. This was in 2017.
Right.
And he said, well, how about on Tuesday? And Dick said, well, yeah, fine, we're going to be there, so okay. And John Ficarra, the editor, something of a curmudgeon, said, oh, he's never going to show up. And 4:30 sharp on Tuesday, we get a thing from the desk at the downstairs of the building saying, there's a Mr. Miranda here. Okay, send him up. Now, we thought he was going to come up like this big entourage, big, you know, big Broadway star, lots. He came up with his boyhood friend who he collected Mads with when he was a kid, and who's now a high school science teacher, which was ironic because that's what Bill Gaines wanted to be before he had to become a comic book impresario. And we lined up to meet him, and I was just really thrilled because I had seen, at this point, I'd seen Hamilton twice, and I was in love with it. And he came and he saw Dick and they hugged each other. And Dick said, this is Sam Viviano, and literally he fell to the ground.
Wow.
So he was as much a fan of us as we were fans of his. And I can just name a lot of people. I think somewhere earlier when our not here, but did you mention Inside Mad? Yeah. Inside Mad is a book we put out maybe 10, 15 years ago. And John had the big idea to get celebrities to write little blurbs about what Mad meant to them. And you know, we had Judd Apatow, we had Roseanne Barr, we had, oh my God, there were so many people, and they all said the same thing. And I'll tell you one more story in that event, then I'll be shut. I edited a book about Mort Drucker. It was Mort Drucker's, you know, Mad's greatest artist. It was a kind of retrospective of his Mad career. And the publisher said, we want to get blurbs for the back cover. And so they were going their own way. They were kind of contacting managers and stuff and agents and getting nowhere. I had met J.J. Abrams, the director, because he was a Mad fan. He actually had visited the Mad offices. So I had the email address, not of J.J., but a producer who worked with him. I wrote to this guy and said, could you get J.J. to write a blurb for the back cover of the book? He said, I'm going to get on it. Within a week, not only did I get an email from J.J. Abrams with more than a blurb, just like an essay. I got one from George Lucas. I got one from Steven Spielberg. I got one from Frank Darabont. And Frank Darabont wrote 2 essays. The email subject line was, Mort Drucker, hell yes. And the fact is that they all were inspired by Mad. They all were influenced by Mad, and in particular by Mort Drucker's artwork. Both George Lucas and Steven Spielberg have big collections of Mort art. And it meant the world to them to be able to say what Mort and Mad meant to them. So these were not blurbs on the back cover. They each got a page, and Frank Darabont got 2 pages, within the book itself, extolling the importance.
Yep.
So,
Okay,
I can't tell you anybody who said, I don't want to be in Mad. I don't like Mad, except for Irving Berlin.
I think we have time for just one more question. Looks like right in the back. Okay, she was first.
First of all, I want to say thank you. It was very interesting. I grew up going to Grandma's house, and in the dining room magazine holder were Mad magazines, always, and I probably read the same one 100 times, and the reason for that is my name's Carrie Rickard Perry, and I'm the niece of Jack Rickard, who my father was his brother. Yeah.
Have you seen his work upstairs?
Yes, I did. I felt so great. It was so cool. I have a wonderful tattoo on my leg, if you want to see it, of a man. My dad was a mailman for 35 years, and Jack had to draw a mailman for one of the issues, and he drew my dad, and so I had it tattooed on my leg.
I want to thank you because I've been saying Jack Rickard my entire life.
Rickard.
Rickard, okay, thank you. And what a terrific artist he was.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
He is
And-
a special man.
And I don't know how anybody tops a tattoo by a mad artist on their leg. And I feel like I, want to get another tattoo at some point. I promise I won't. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Let's give our wonderful panelists another round of applause.